All right, everybody, to another rainy North Carolina afternoon. Do a quick bedtime story here on the French Revolution. And where we're at, we're talking about the Estates General, which is the French Parliament. And it is made up of three different classes, as you can see. The first and most important social class is the clergy, the high-ranking, cardinals, bishops, and archbishops. Number two was the nobles, the old nobles left over from Louis XIV's reign. And last but not least, we have everybody else, from your rich, artisans and merchants and professionals, down to the poorest peasant. And the problem going on with the Estates General system is that voting was done by a state as a whole. 90% of the people were always outvoted and beaten by the richest 10%. So when it would come to a vote on raising taxes on the poor people, the third estate would lose because they were beaten by a vote of 2-1. No matter what happened, the third estate always lost. So they wanted to vote by individual person. All right, if you look at the scale, here it is. 27 million people, lawyers, merchants, peasants, professionals, had no rights. They were always losing. Added to this problems were the discontent because the French had lost the French and Indian War in North America. And on top of that was financing of other wars, and King Louis XVI will give the United States financial assistance during the Revolution, adding to the financial stress of his kingdom. And what's sad is France at this time was actually economically prosperous. While France's opposition, Spain, England, should have been in debt, France was financially solid. The big problem is the king here could not fairly collect taxes that could pay off his debts. He had no idea on how to do this. So in the mid-1780s, Louis XVI appoints several economic wizards, ministers, to correct this problem. However, no matter what they did, nothing worked because of the Estates General's system. They could not get the church and the nobles to increase their tax payments. So the result was new taxes keep getting dumped on the third estate. And so by this time, the Estates General hadn't met in over 100 years. All right, Louis XIV, we remember him an absolute monarch. He wasn't calling them, whatever. And the Estates General could only meet when summoned. But when you're an absolute like Louis XIV, you make all the decisions yourself. Well, his descendant, Louis XVI, doesn't have his ancestors' brilliance and charisma and just, ferocity. So King Louis XVI, who came to power as a very young boy, agrees to call the Estates General. I'll bring everybody together to help me figure out a way to solve this crisis. But you got to remember that some members of the Third Estate were fairly educated. They were hardworking French citizens. All right? They were professionals, as you saw, lawyers, merchants, bankers. And when they find out that they're supposed to meet separate, they're not allowed in the same room with the other two, they get angry. We are not going to meet separate. You don't want to meet with us because you don't like us. And so in June of 1789, members of the Third Estate start talking to sympathetic members of the First and Second. Maybe low-ranking nobles, maybe low-ranking or honest clergymen. And they say, hey, why don't you come with us and help us create a new legislator, a new legislative body that we're going to call the National Constituent Assembly, all right, or the NCA. come along and do this with us. First, they were going to call it the National Assembly. And this happens, but as the members of this new National Assembly arrive at their normal location, the door was locked, and they're knocking on it, and they're knocking on it, and they're yanking on the door handle, and they can't get in, and they're like, oh my God, you know who did this to us? The king is blocking us. In reality, the custodian was hungover. He had gotten drunk the day before, and he just simply didn't unlock the door. But the citizens felt the king was doing this on purpose. So they marched to his palace. Then, right now it is known as the Louvre. Then it was his palace, and they stood there, and they demanded that he meet with them. And they would not leave until he spoke to them. So they're there for days. And they were standing on his tennis court. And they take what is known as the famous tennis court oath. We will not leave until the king meets with us. Now, if you know anything about tennis, in England, their big, match for the, tennis cup is played at Wimbledon on a grassy surface, where the French Open is played on clay. Legend has it that the people standing around on the king's tennis court rooted the grass up and left nothing but dirt. So as a result, in an homage to the French Revolution, the French Open is played on a clay surface. Don't know if that's true or not, but that's supposedly the legend. Well, the king won't leave, and finally, as they were chanting, Louis, Louis, come on out here, he agrees to meet with them. And he tells the first two estates, the clergy and the nobles, that they must join this new legislature. So they renamed the National Assembly the National Constituent Assembly. So we got the States General to the National Assembly to the National Constituent Assembly. In the NCA, voting was going to go on by individual person. It was no longer going to be a state as a whole. Every single individual would be counted. So in theory, this ended the French government being run by the rich and the wealthy. No longer...
Attention please, would Janelle Price please report to the main office? Janelle Price to the main office, please.
In theory, this will end the government run by the privileged classes. No longer is that possible. Well, when this happens, they are going to write a new constitution. All right, the French government is going to institute a new city government of Paris, and we are going to try and pacify our own people. And so now that the National Constituent Assembly is created, they're going to write a new constitution, which they do. The problem is this: the National Constituent Assembly will combine the ideas of Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. They take the ideas of John Locke and the Baron de Montesquieu from the Enlightenment, and they come up with their new constitution, which they call the Declaration of the Rights of a Man and a Citizen. I'll have this on the board tomorrow. The Declaration of the Rights of a Man and a Citizen. In the United States, we call this the Constitution. And if you ran it through Turnitin.com, it would probably be flagged. Very similar between the two documents. The Declaration of the Rights of a Man and a Citizen said that all men are born and remain free. They are equal in basic rights, such as life, liberty, and property and security. And it is therefore the government, the king's responsibility to protect these rights. Again, this was very similar to the United States Constitution, but King Louis XVI delayed in the ratification. They presented it to him and he was supposed to sign it right away, but he doesn't. And this causes many people to speculate that he may send the army into Paris to destroy the National Constituent Assembly. Louis will leave Paris. He will leave his small Parisian apartment and move out to Versailles. He needed the fresh air of the countryside to remove the document. Well, when Louis leaves the city, and he goes about 12 miles outside to Versailles, he does something stupid. He summons the army, and the army begins practicing and drilling just outside the city walls, making the people believe that he was going to loose the army on them while he's out in Versailles. He doesn't want to ratify this. It's going to take his power. And while they were out there, several thousand women, starving women, decide that they are going to march on Versailles themselves, demanding more bread to feed their starving families. These women just wanted, a good mom wants to make sure her kids are fed. The problem was there was an inefficient way of bringing food from the countryside into the city. The food was spoiling. So a lot of people were baking bread. If you eat a little bit of bread, you will feel full and you won't be hungry anymore. But flour was so expensive, nobody could afford bread. So the women are going to march out to Versailles. And they are going to want to meet with the king. He's going to meet with them come hell or high water. And so we will pick up in class tomorrow with the women of Paris marching on Versailles, singing, Louis, Louis, hey, Louis, we won't go, no, 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 until you meet with us. So, we now have rebelled against the king. We have formed a new government, the National Constituent Assembly. A constitution is written, the Declaration of the Rights of a Man and a Citizen. And we are going to have what we call is a constitutional monarchy when we have the first, what we know as a journée. Well, the people will dictate the course of the revolution, but we will pick all that up tomorrow. I'll see you guys then.